Dave Julian, and I'm going to do a demo on creating a realistic tattoo, in this case on a woman's back. So here we go. This is the finished product. It's the finished tattoo. You can see skin coming through the tattoo, so it feels realistic, and this tattoo is also conforming to the shapes of her back and bones. And I've also created a hue saturation adjustment layer that allows us to colorize part of the tattoo. So this is pretty much the finished product, and this is what you're after. And now I will start with the photo, and the photo is called Woman's Back Toned. It's in your folder. And this photograph, I want to give credit to Franck Foucaud of France. And here is the picture of the back, and you can see that she's got a lot of skin texture, and we want to preserve that in the tattoo because tattoos are in the skin, not on top of the skin. So the next thing I do is I bring the tattoo onto her back. I've already got it up here at the top of the screen. All I need to do is select it and then drag and drop the tattoo layer onto the other open document and put it right on her back. And you can see it's quite small, so I'm going to want to resize that and probably angle it just a bit or rotate it just a bit. And then I've got to remove the background. So first I'm going to remove the background because by doing that first I could better see the tattoo against her back. So I'm going to use the magic wand, set it to 3x3 or 5x5, and also make sure the tolerance is high enough so that it selects every white pixel as best I can. There it is. I've got the white pixels. And sometimes there's a telltale edge that's left when you do this. So one of the things I like to do is hold down my Shift key and get the rectangular marquee and just use that marquee to grab extra pixels around the edges here. And you need to go start from the outside of your image and just barely touch inside without touching the tattoo. And with the Shift key held down, it enlarged the entire selection to make sure I have absolutely no white pixels at the edges left. And we don't even need to mask this because we're really not needing a mask. I'm just going to hit the delete key, and you can see that I need to go get these two with the magic wand. And don't worry about a couple little telltale pixels here and there. You're not going to see them in the final. And I'm going to hit delete here. And there we go. Another technique I use sometimes is to command click, invert that selection, and then actually you can hit delete again and again. And sometimes that removes a few other stray white pixels. So here we are. Now we can size this up. And so I'm going to go to Free Transform, which is Command T, and I'm going to size this tattoo up, and I'm also going to tilt it just slightly. And I need to then switch from scale to rotate, so I hold down the Control or right-click inside and choose Rotate, go outside the corner, and just barely rotate this so it feels like it's in line with her spine, which isn't quite perfectly vertical in the photograph. Now I'm going to say OK or hit return, and there's the basics of where we're going. So in order for this tattoo to appear as if it's really on her skin, we need to do a few things, and one of those is change the layer blend mode. And there are several different ways of doing this, but for instance, if you have a colored tattoo or you want the tattoo to not appear black ink but maybe brown ink, then you could actually go to something like soft light, and you can see that that blends the tattoo into her back skin a little bit more. Some people use luminosity, which I'm not using anymore. I think that using darken works well because, as you noticed, if you use darken or multiply, slightly different, all the white pixels completely disappear. And that's one of the things that we want to happen. All right, so we've got that done, and we now can lower the opacity, and that starts to let tones show through, but it's still not really looking like the tattoo is sitting in her skin. And there's a couple more things we have to do also to make this conform to the shape of her body. So I'm going to do what's called making a displacement map of her back and then use it to distort the tattoo around her shapes. And here's the way it's going to work. I have to turn off the tattoo, make sure I have no selections active, so I Command-D that. I'm going to take this layer and duplicate it. You can duplicate it by dragging it down onto the new layer icon, or you can just use Command-J. And this one here we're going to blur. So I go up here to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and 3.0 is just about right. Some people say 2, but all you're trying to do is blur this copy of the layer so that you don't see quite as much skin texture here. Okay, so I'm going to say OK to that. And then what we do now is we save out a copy of this file as a PSD that's not layered. And that's going to serve as our bump map. So I have to go here, go to Save As. I'm going to deselect the Layers option, and I'm going to call this DMap, as in displacement map, because that's what we're going to use. Say replace, because I'd already made that one other time. And we don't need this layer any longer. That's the blurred layer. I'm going to toss it out. And now we're going to enable the tattoo and use the displacement map we just made. In order to do that, we go into the filter menu again, but this time to distort, to displace, and I've already used this before, so I'm just going to use 10 as my horizontal and vertical scale. Those should be the same whether you use 10 or 15, doesn't really matter. You might choose one or the other after doing it and then undoing it just to see how it distorts. Make sure Stretch to Fit is checked here, and make sure Repeat Edge Pixels is checked. Say OK, and watch the difference in the tattoo. We have to go get the toned DMap file that we just made. Now I'm going to Command-Z. You can see how the tattoo has molded around her folds just a bit, and that helps us have a realistic tattoo. Now if we're doing a tattoo on an arm, which is more of a wrap, this makes even more sense. So let's just watch it here. So now I've got the opacity lowered, I've got the tattoos wrapped around in her, but there's more that I have to do to make this feel realistic. And one of the ways I like to do that is to go and double-click the layer. You can double-click the icon here, and opens to Layer Style. Sometimes you've seen this accidentally when you accidentally double-clicked your layer wrong, and so here's a chance for you to actually use it. We're going to use the Blend If mode. That's the way that professional people who use photographs in Photoshop can choose what tones in the image get blended with different layers. So this is a black layer, and if I was to play with this and start to drag the slider down, the white slider wouldn't do anything for us because there's no white in the image. The black slider will just simply make this disappear. So we actually are going to work with the skin layer, and the way I found it useful is you don't just do the entire white slider because it corrodes the image. But if you split the white slider by holding down the Option or Alt key on a PC and drag it to the left, you can see that what it's doing is it's taking very, very subtle tones from her skin, in this case the highlights that were made by the studio lighting, and it lets them actually show through the layer above. So the further left you go, the more transparent your tattoo and the more texture shows through it. And you do want to go pretty far because a tattoo is never as solid as the way we found the file. It's always transparent ink that's been needled into the skin. So it's actually below the skin layer, so it's always got a little bit of a skin tone above it. So there it is that we've got that nice and conformed to her shapes. It's transparent enough so that we can see her skin through it, even the highlight areas. So I'm going to say OK to that. And there's one other thing, and that tattoos are not perfectly sharp because they are in human skin and the skin heals over them. Now we have to blur this slightly, so we're going to go back to Gaussian blur. Only this time we're going to use a very, very small Gaussian blur. because we don't want the tattoo to be completely blurred. We just want it to be blurred enough so that it's not super sharp. That feels about right. You can use whatever number feels right. It can be 1 or it can be 2 or 1.5. It's kind of a favorite. So I'm going to say OK to 1.5. And now it starts to feel like a real tattoo. There's one other thing that I've done in order to make tattoos raise off the skin a little bit, because tattoos actually cause a reaction to the skin that makes them somewhat tactile, and they're almost like embossed. So I'm actually going to go down here into the layer effects, and I'm going to grab bevel and emboss. And I've already done this once, so I still have things set up the way I did before. And I like to set it on emboss. I'm going to enlarge this so you can see it a little bit better. And this is a real experimental part of Photoshop. You'll get different effects on different photographs that you work with and different tattoos you work with. One thing I will say is you want to match the position of the lighting so that it's similar to the lighting that was used on the body, which in this case is from the upper left. So I'm moving this lighting here to that position. So our purpose is to get a slightly raised edge in appearance on this tattoo. You'll have to experiment a bit, and what I found works is emboss and this set to smooth or chisel soft. And then the size has to be very subtle as well, and the depth. And it's nice to go overboard at first just to see how this works, and then you can always dial it back. Another thing is you get to use whatever you want for your highlight color. So see how you can see a little bit of a light raised edge? That's what you want to see. And what I've done is actually changed these from black and white to a color. I'll show you how I did that. Here's how they default. And this may have also been in a different layer mode. But screen and multiply seem to work well. So what I do is, I don't want to see white highlights on skin, so I colored it like the skin. And what I did is I clicked on here, and I just can either sample the skin here, and then I can actually increase that tone just a little bit more. And then down here, I do the same thing, only this time I sample the tattoo, and I go even just a little bit further. It doesn't matter exactly what these colors are, you just want the effect of seeing a little bit of a raised look to the tattoo. So you may end up experimenting with these and experimenting with the position of the lighting that you're doing here, or they call it the shading. And you may end up changing the values here depending on your model, and you may end up wanting to play with this. So this is a very flexible area to work in, as are these. So it just takes a little bit of practice to try it out and zooming in and checking it out and then saying, does that look realistic to me? You might want to soften that bevel a little bit so it's got a smoother fall off to the skin. So it's all very, very subtle as to how it works. Add a little bit more than just the amount I had there before. And I'm going to soften those edges. And now that tattoo feels to me that it's sitting off the skin a bit and that the skin's a little bit raised. I'm going to say OK to that. And that's a very editable layer style. So if you don't like the look of it, just come and double click here and edit it down. And now I'm going to zoom out. We can see the effect really feels like a tattoo. Now, let's say you wanted to colorize part of this tattoo. You can do that with an adjustment layer. And the way it works is I'm going to grab a hue saturation adjustment layer. Oops, it's down here where you can't see it. There's hue sat adjustment layer. And the way it works is you colorize the existing tattoo, and then you mask away the areas you don't want. We have to also clip this adjustment layer so that it only appears on the tattoo and does its work, not on the whole back. Now, after we've hit Colorize, we actually go to Lighten, and as we bring this slider up, it starts to turn black into color, especially if we add some saturation. And now you can see also that the embossed areas are getting a little bit funky, so we're going to address that in a minute. So depending on the effect and the color you want, you can change saturation, you can change lightness, and I like to go pretty subtle on the lightness so that I see color, but I don't see blazing color. That's about as far as I want. And now I'm going to fill this mask with black and then just use a white brush to reveal this area here. I go to Fill, choosing black, 100%. So now I have masked away the effect of the hue sat layer, and I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to select carefully around this part of the tattoo. I've got to use a little bit of fix there. Okay, make sure. And now all I have to do is paint with white there. So I'm actually going to flip these colors so that white's the background color, and I'm going to hit delete. And now the colored part of the tattoo shows up. As a result of using this method, sometimes these embosses don't look quite right anymore. So that's why you can come in here and you can toy around with the emboss so that you get it just the way you want. You could also even do the red part of the tattoo on a separate layer, and then you'd be able to control the embossment of that one separately. Call it good for the demo, and go back down there, and there is our tattoo. You can turn off the effects if you want to see what it looks like without, and there we go.